Hi, welcome to CG Jam's What's It For series, and in this episode we're going to be looking at the texture input node, and we'll be using the texture modeling system that we use in 3D models normally. And the good thing about Blender is that you can use the same texture setup that you use for models in the compositor directly, which is a handy feature. So let's get right into it and start by looking at the node itself. The first things we see is it has two outputs and two inputs. The first output is the value, the second is the colour. Now the value output just produces a black and white image, and it's used for mathematical functions, and the colour generates any colour data that you have, so you can use an image or a colorized background. And the drop down menu has any textures that are available to us that we may have made already. And then we have two vector inputs. The first is the offset, and that gives us an XYZ value of the texture that we can adjust to fit into our scene. And then we have the scale, which resizes the size of the texture. Okay, so the first way I want to use it is as a background. So first thing I'm going to do is add an image node and connect that up, and then just open the node and find the image that we want to use. In this instance I'm just going to use a picture of Abraham Lincoln that I found online, which has the alpha background already cut out for me. And then I will simply readjust the size of the output settings, because this default settings are completely wrong for the image, and it's one of the things we need to do to make the effect work. We can always adjust the size of the output final afterwards, but while we're working it's good to work in the correct size and just adjust the percentage of the image. So we have a 2850 by 3742 at 50%, so that should be nice and easy. Alright, so let's just scroll out and have a look at the image, and as you can see, Abraham Lincoln with an alpha background. And what we want to do is replace that background with our texture. So we go into our texture node, have a look at it, and see we have nothing in there. So what we need to do is come over to the texture settings, and we're using Blender Render as opposed to Cycles because we have more options in Blender Render engine. So let's just scroll over here, and you see the default texture is called text, and it's just a blank texture. So we'll rename it, and then we'll go down to the type, and we will choose the wood. And then, as this isn't really an actual texturing tutorial, I'm going to make a few quick changes and then open it up in the compositor. And once we've done that, we can go back to our compositor, and if we go full screen, let's open up our texture, and there it is, background. Just click that and it should pop into our scene. There we go. That's what we want, and now we need to connect these two together, and to do that we will just use a simple mix node. So if you Shift A, color mix, and you'll notice the first thing that happens is our image actually gets turned white, which is because our image is in the top slot and we need the white in the top, not the bottom. So the image goes into the bottom, which is the top layer. Confusing, I know, but if we swap them over you'll see. Now we need the texture to be in the background, so we don't want the value, we want the colour. So we put that in the top slot, and you see it all goes slightly wrong, and the reason for that is because our scale is at 50%, so it's trying to fit the image into the same texture size as the texture. So we need to adjust that, and we can simply do that with a texture with a distort scale node. So Shift A, and we will drop that in. Distort, scale. There we go. Drop that in, and then set it to render size. And if we duplicate that and drop it on the image, now both of our nodes are at the correct size. Okay, that's great, but you can still see that the background is white and we wanted the colour. So what went wrong? Well, that's down to the alpha channel, and to activate that we need to press this little button on the mix node, and there we go. Now it looks a little bit too big to me, so we come down to the scale, adjust the X, push that up a little bit, 10 is enough, and the Y just to balance it out, pull that up until it looks nice. And we don't need to mess around with the Z at all, but we will for no reason. And that's it for the background. Now there's more that we can do with the texture node, and I'm going to show you one technique quickly, which is to use it not as a background but as a foreground. So I just cleared out my workspace and we shall begin. So the first thing I want to do for this particular effect is to add a movie input node. And if I just hit Shift A and choose the movie input node, that will be ideal. And then we just search for the particular clip that I want to use. There we go, lovely. And if I zoom out, you can see it's just a simple image of a pan on a stove. Delightful, nothing exciting there. But if we go into the textures, and we can begin setting up our effect. So the first thing we do is rename the texture, and I want to call it smoke. And then I want to choose the clouds, just type, and then adjust all the settings as necessary for the effect. And again, it's not a texturing tutorial, so I will zoom through this. Alright, there we go. So now all we need to do is to bring the texture in, so add input texture, there we go. And select from the drop down menu the smoke texture that we've just made. Like so. Now we need to connect these two together in such a way that the texture appears on top of the image clip, movie clip. So let's just make some space, and I want this texture over the top. So if I choose a color alpha over instead of a mix node, because for some reason a mix node doesn't actually work in this instance, so I put the recycle clip in the bottom layer, which is the top slot, and the texture into the bottom socket, which is the top layer. I know, confusing, but that's the way it goes. But as you can see, our clouds texture is covering our image, but we need to constrain it to the pan. So let's go into our image editor and we will add a mask so that we can constrain it properly and just have it where we want it. So just change the view to mask, and now we will just start placing our mask around the pan. Hold down Control and just add the points of the mask, like so. And then we just need to join them up, and we need to open our toolbar, go to toggle cyclic, and that will close the mask off. I forget the shortcut, but that's by the by. And now we can just adjust the mask by grabbing hold of the center of the lines and pulling it into place. It's a bit fiddly and it can take a little bit of time, but with a bit of care and attention, and taking your time over this step can be really well, it's all going to be beneficial, but it will make a big difference to this particular rush job that I'm doing, because tutorials try and keep them short. We don't have to spend hours doing these things. So I will do this time lapse and then get back. Great, so now to use it we need to come back to our compositor, and what we want to use now is a mask node to hide everything that's outside the pan and just constrain the smoke to the pan. So import mask, and we've shown you how to use the mask node before, which is just simply connect it to the factor socket like so, and that will place the mask into the pan, except it doesn't, because again we have the problem with the scale. So again we need to shift A and add the scale node, and that's under distort again, scale, just find it, there we go. We drop that on and then we can duplicate it and add one to each of the other inputs, just to make sure everything is working in the right scale together. And nothing happened because we are still in relative mode, so we need to change that on each of them to render size. And there we go, and now you can see that the pan is now full of our clouds texture. So now we can begin to think about animating our texture, and if we look at the offset you can see we have three values, x, y and z, and the y value relates to the image from top to bottom, the x value from left to right, and the z value from the front to the back, as it were, of the image. If you were looking at it from the top down, you will be looking through the image on the z depth value. Okay, but what we want to do is animate these particular values. So if I reduce the z, that will give us a bit of turbulence, and if I reduce the if I increase the y to 2 at the we don't need to touch the x, and now if we insert some keyframes with I, and nothing happens. But we can fit our keyframes by right clicking, and that will bring up our menu, and we can insert the keyframes that way. And that works, so that's good. So on our first frame we have the keyframes Y and Z, which will give us our smoke movement. Now we just need to jump to the end of our timeline. Let's scroll ahead to find our controls. There we go, jump to the end, and now go back to our offset. If we lower the Y right down, that will make the texture rise upwards in the picture, and if we increase the Z, that will give us the turbulence, and that's all animated, and that's lovely. Very simple, nice and easy. But we want the smoke to actually rise, not just churn around in the bottom of the pan, so we need to do some keyframing on our mask. So let's go do that now. And the first thing we need to do is come back to our timeline and scroll along a bit and press this little red button, and that will give us our auto keyframing. So anytime we move anything within our mask, these little handles, it will insert a keyframe, and we don't need to keep pressing I and choosing the keyframe positions. It's all done automatically. Okay, so now if I move into certain frame, move along 10 frames, raise up and start pulling the mask apart, you can see it's going to slowly rise up and give us our smoke plume effect, as if it's rising out of the pan. So I'm going to leave this to do its thing for a second. It's not going to take long, and then we can move on to the next step. Next step being just simply check over everything, and then we can go straight to our render settings. And I'll just create an output folder, and I'm going to put this in my temp file as normal, hashtag, not hashtag, just call it smoke. That should create a new folder for me to have all the renders output. Now just click animation and we can fly through quickly, really quickly, and you can see it's taking less than 3 seconds for each frame, and we just leave it to get on with its thing. Actually we don't, we have to stop it because we're not rendering our smoke. Turn that off a second. And the reason for that is because foolishly we forgot to connect up our composite node. Everything is going through the viewer and only the image output is going through the composite node. So we just can take the alpha over, connect that into the composite, and now we can make sure everything is connected. Yep. That's fine. And we'll just go to the render settings and render animation and let it go again. And now you can see it's still taking exactly the same amount of time, less than 3 seconds, 2.5 seconds to render each frame. So this is not going to take any time at all. And I'll leave it to do its thing and let you see the final result as soon as it comes in, which is now. Just play rendered animation. Of course it's only at 50%, and there you go, a nice rising smoke plume. Okay, it's not brilliant because we did a rush job and you can see the edges of the pan, it doesn't quite match up, and some of the initial starting could do with a bit more feathering. As you can see it's a bit sharp at the beginning, and a bit of feathering will help it to blend in more and make it a little bit more realistic. Obviously there's more we can do with this, but this hopefully will just give you an idea of some of the effects that you could use textures for, and we will let you go there, and good luck in your projects, and we will see you in the next video. And that's it for now. Goodbye.